And it actually took me waiting almost a month to be able to get on her calendar for an in-person meeting. And it was less than 30 minutes because of how busy she was. But she became my advocate after that. And that's where I think sometimes transitioning from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum, from thinking about a faith-based fundraising to a more secular mainstream fundraising, you have to be willing to follow through.
Welcome to the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Whether you are a seasoned professional or a first-time fundraiser, we have the advice you need to take your next step toward major gift mastery. I'm your host, Tom Dauber, President of Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Today, I'm pleased to welcome to the show Jason George, Chief Development Officer for Vineyard USA. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Well, it's really great to have you. Jason, I've known you, at least by reputation, since college. We've always had a lot of mutual friends, and it's really funny how two lives can kind of overlap, but you still never meet the person. I don't think we actually met maybe until I don't know, like 2010s or so.
I think that was the first time we hung out.
Yeah.
But I think you and I met back in college.
Maybe
I remember connecting through Jeff Moore at one point.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. And I know we were at some of the same conferences and those sorts of things back in the day. So I'll tell you what, it's been really neat. Both you and I have a history with Campus Crew. Well, with Crew. Sorry, I got to say that name right. And it's really funny how many people I keep meeting that have a couple things in common. A lot of folks that I keep interacting with have time with the organization Crew. Many of them have also a lot in like an overlap with Joshua House, which was Vineyard USA or Vineyard Columbus's young adult service years ago. You know, there's a few published authors I've even run across that were at like Miami University, also of Indian descent, actually, as I think about it, that have done very well for themselves. But I don't know. It just must be the age that we're at. We just, we're starting to hit our stride.
Something like that. Like that.
Right. So I'm excited to have you on and to learn about your professional journey. The goal of these podcasts, when you and I were at Ohio State, we were surrounded by peers that we could learn from. And we had bosses, we had managers, and even they had managers with years of experience. And I know that I learned a ton from that. In my last interview we both worked for Colleen Garland at one point over at, well, I worked with her at OSU, you worked with her at Kenyon, but at one point she made a decision to move us over to a large business building at Ackerman Road, where a lot of fundraisers were housed out of the dental school. And so I began rubbing shoulders every day with a whole team of fundraisers. And one of the guys that I worked with there was just a consummate corporate relations guy. And that education for me meant a lot. And as I'm talking to nonprofit leaders today, what I'm realizing is a lot of them are in small shops. They may not be working for someone with any fundraising experience. They don't have any peers to mentor them, to teach them. And so part of the inspiration for this podcast is to let them rub shoulders, at least virtually, with you today so that they can hear some of your stories and gain some of your wisdom so that when they run across the situation, maybe that you even talk about today, they're like, oh, I remember Jason talking about that. And that's going to help them grow. So, but before we get into all that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal life. Where are you from? How do you like to spend your time when you're not raising money?
Sure. So I live in Delaware, Ohio, just north of Columbus. I have 4 kids, recently remarried to a woman who has just been the living picture of redemption for me.
Oh, wow.
She loves me in spite of me. And it's pretty awesome to see how my kids have gravitated to her and taken to her. And thankfully, she's more than willing to accept and reciprocate and intentionally love them back in Yeah, I feel like I'm in a weird space of like, wow, I haven't recognized just how blessed I am until you like have a moment to stop and think and look and observe. And I'm here and I'm just like, yeah, there are days where I'm just like, Lord, I'm just welling up with tears and I don't know why.
Mm. Wow. Wow.
And
That's
it's just,
awesome.
it's a fun space. It's a fun space.
Wow. That's fantastic. I'm so happy for you guys, Jason. Well, I'd love to hear, how did you get into the nonprofit world? Certainly you didn't start in college with that in mind.
No, so it's funny. Like when I had, I had a normal conversion experience to faith in Jesus
Mhm.
in college. You know, I did the whole church thing in high school, and but I was a partier. And then when I came to faith, it was pretty radical for me because it shifted everything in my paradigm. Up to that point, I was thinking get my degree in journalism, go to law school, and then make bank for the rest of my life. That was the plan. And then faith in Jesus kind of shifted that a whole lot and flipped the paradigm of my life upside down to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to serve. I
Mhm.
don't care about making bank. I'll serve. And so ended up going to Azerbaijan for 2 years um, with crew and got the chance to teach English and just serve. And it was amazing. Decided to stay on staff with crew and did 5 years total 3 years at 3 more years at Michigan State University. But for me, part of the wheelhouse of being in ministry with crew was you had to raise your own support,
Mhm.
and so that's how I delved into really the first time of fundraising in my life. And it was for me, it was I equated it to hand to mouth,
Yeah.
like it was my daily provision.
Mhm.
So I had to be conversant enough with it to be able to do it well in a replicable way without it stressing out the rest of my life so that I could still do the things I wanted to do in service to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I jumped into fundraising in general. And then, you know, after 14 years of ministry, 12 years of that, we're fully funded
Mhm.
support wise. Left the ministry because, you know, I went through a hard divorce. And I had to reevaluate life in general, trying to figure things out. And so as I was reevaluating, a friend of mine was like, "Why not just think about fundraising?" I'm like, you've like you're doing corporate sales now, you're doing good, but it's taking you away from the kids in the middle of all of the stuff that you're going through. Jason, maybe it's better to think about something that would give you more bandwidth to be with the kids.
Yeah.
And then so as I started thinking through that, the same friend was just like, "Why not think about Ohio State?" And I'm like, "Well, why would they want me? I'm not an ex-athlete." And he started laughing. He's like, "No, no, no, no. Every college at the university and every department at the med center
Yeah.
has their own fundraising team." And so ironically, I actually reached out to you at that point
That's right.
because I had seen that you were a fundraiser there.
Yeah.
And I think it took almost a year for me to even get a shot at an interview.
Yeah.
But and it was funny because like I didn't know what I didn't know. And I knew my experience transferred.
Mhm.
I knew my skills transferred, but I had no idea how to create a resume that and looked good and actually told the right story.
That's right.
And honestly, I mean, bro, like if you hadn't just revamped my resume, I don't know where I would be today.
I'll tell you, I you're not the first person coming from a faith-based background who's kind of done the missionary support gig that I've tried to help get connected there, and it's very rarely. Yeah, I mean, you're the only time. You're the only person I've helped get in, and it was hard for me to get in. It took me months coming also out of that faith-based space, but I'll tell you, I think that missionary support type of fundraising model is one of the hardest ways or approaches to fundraising there is, because
Mhm.
it's so personal. So much of your psyche is connected to fundraising because you're asking money for your own salary that you're going to use to feed your family.
Yeah.
And so it's so hard to get the distance that you need to really think objectively about it. I mean, I it truly was easier for me at Ohio State to ask someone for $25,000 than it was for me to ask someone for $1,000 in my
Oh,
old role.
for sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember like even when I was in ministry, I remember them telling us, try not to make sure you have one person who gives so much of your budget, because if they ever choose to not give any more, you might
Yeah.
be out of the ministry for a little while as you re-raise support. And that was always in the back of my head.
Yeah.
And so I always was hedging my bets on asking for big gifts. But then I was terrified on the bad months. I was
Yeah.
like, well, do I know enough people? And it was funny because it wasn't until I left crew and entered a different missions organization, and they just had a completely different ethos about it.
Mm-hmm.
They helped me free myself up in some ways to be a little healthier with it.
Yeah.
From their paradigms were just like, if this is what God wants for you, He's gonna open doors if you're just willing to ask,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
let the Lord determine for them what they want to do for you. And so I wasn't as terrified to take on. I mean, that second time around, we had one giver who was giving like $1,000 a month, and another giver who's giving $500 a month, and then the rest were just the normal 50, 25,
Yeah.
$75 a month. And there would be moments when I was terrified,
Yeah.
but each year, both those two families, they saw what we were doing. They saw our passion,
Mm.
and they upped their giving. The $1,000 giver ended up becoming a $1,400 giver a month, and
That's
the 500,
strong. That's
yeah,
really strong for that type of fundraising.
yeah, and then that $500 giver a month, he ended up doing an extra end of the year gift just because he loved what we did.
Yeah.
And so it was, you're right. It was a wearing moment. I shouldn't say that. It was wearing moments on the psyche that always felt like it was just this underlying heat
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that you just could never escape, because even when the good gifts came in, you were always wondering, well, will I still have enough by year end?
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
And it wasn't, and the problem with that is it always equated to the projects you wanted to do personally for your ministry or your own dang paycheck.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. When I was working for Central Ohio Youth for Christ, it it was a little different because not only was I doing kind of the missionary support thing, there was a community fundraising aspect to it. And I was living in the community I was doing most of my fundraising in. And I'll never forget, like, one of my best donors, and in that environment, I saw most of my donors every couple months, like face to face. Like I'd be visiting their churches or I'd stop by to see them. And one of my best donors just stopped giving out of the blue. And I called her up, and she told me, "Well, I just can't support a ministry that has kids eat live goldfish." And I looked at her and said, "Why do you think I'm having kids eat live goldfish?" And she said, "Well, somebody told me you were." And it was just it was awful. Of course we weren't. Uh,
Well, I mean,
live goldfish isn't my thing, right?
yeah,
And
but it's also a funny, like a youth ministry
well,
story. I mean,
well,
all sorts of weird stuff gets eaten
well,
during youth ministry.
it is, but I lost one of my, had she said, "Oh, you're making kids, eat blended up Happy Meals." I mean, be like, yeah, well, that's, a guilty as charged. But it was tough because, there was a local rumor, and I lost one of my best donors permanently.
Oh
She
man,
had moved on and decided to support a different missionary at that point.
that was terrible.
Tom Dauber here for Abundant Vision Academy. Are you a nonprofit leader who's new to fundraising? Are you feeling crushed by your fundraising goals and not sure how to find success? My online class, crafted from my 25 years of experience and more than 5,000 donor meetings, Abundant Vision Academy will give you the confidence and understanding you need to start building relationships with donors and having gift discussions in just 110 minutes. You'll get 14 videos covering all the topics you need to find success in fundraising. You can take it at your own pace and can watch as many times as you'd like. This is one of the best deals in fundraising continuing education you can get today. To make sure you get off to a strong start in 2024, I'm offering a 50% discount to anyone signing up for my course this spring. That's a $375 value. Enter the coupon code SPRING2024 at checkout to claim your 50% discount. That's spring 2024. Head on over to thomas-dauber-s-school.com fundraising.teachable.com and click on Abundant Vision Academy to get your discount today. The link is in the podcast description. So yeah, it was tough. So like I was saying, I've seen a lot of people struggle to transition from the missionary support style of fundraising into major gift fundraising. Not in terms of the actual fundraiser itself, but just in terms of being looked at as an attractive candidate. You kind of
Oh,
reference
sure.
that a bit with the resume. What was that experience like for you?
Um, so I actually remember pretty well my experience at OSU trying to break in, and it took me forever to realize who the gatekeeper was.
Hmm.
Wonderful woman,
Mm-hmm.
and I think because of my pedigree,
Mm-hmm.
he had assumed I would be a certain type of way, which would have gone against, in her mind, maybe the vibe and the ethos that
Mm-hmm.
OSU Alumni Association was looking for.
Sure.
Just being like, are you a Christian conservative, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
Are you going to
Right.
be proselytizing people for Jesus every time you
Mm-hmm.
meet with them?
Mm-hmm.
And then when she actually got to know me and realized, she sat down with me. I think you even encouraged me to reach out to her and talk to
Sure. Sure. Sure.
her. And
Sure.
I did. And all of a sudden, I saw the narrative flip from the beginning of the conversation to the end of the conversation. And she looked at me. She goes, "Can you just do me a favor?" She's like, "The recommendations you got about your resume to change, make those last changes, resend it to me.
Hmm.
I will see what I can do."
Yeah.
Within a week, I was in the annual giving fundraising pool.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow, this is different. And so I think in some ways, you have to fight the perceptions
Mm-hmm.
that come inherently with coming from a ministry background.
Yeah.
But you have to do so in an honest, transparent way where people are able to see you as a person
Mm-hmm.
and not just this banner they think you have flying above you.
Yeah. 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 I think that's true from all sorts of directions.
For sure.
Maybe you've worked, for a right to life organization, and maybe you're somebody that's against that sort of thing, or maybe you've worked for Planned Parenthood, and so you've also, people on the right are gonna maybe have a different view of that sort of thing. Politics, especially these days, can really color the way we look at candidates for jobs, and I think allowing that to get in the way really can cause us to miss out on some really great candidates.
Yeah, and I actually appreciated. Her name was Steph Miser.
Yeah, Steph's great.
Steph's amazing,
Mm-hmm.
and she became one of my biggest advocates
Mm.
as she helped as I figured out how to where I wanted to be at
Yeah.
OSU, and then
Mm.
all of a sudden I was offered a position. Got through the interview process at the Wexner Medical Center, and
Yep.
finally landed a position. She was still checking in on me every year, uh,
Hmm.
just to make sure I'm doing well, and it's I think it's a moment of we have to be willing to take that extra step, and it was me reaching out to. Took a little bit of research to figure out who the right person to talk to was,
Yeah.
and it actually took me waiting almost a month to be able to get on her calendar for an in-person meeting. And it was less than 30 minutes because of how busy she was.
Yeah.
But she became my advocate after that. And that's where I think sometimes transitioning from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
from thinking about a faith-based fundraising to a more secular mainstream fundraising,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be willing to just to follow through.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually the name of the game for 90% of fundraising.
You got that right.
So,
So I'm curious, listening right now, there might be someone who is thinking about moving from the faith-based world into a more secular environment, maybe at a state university, something along those lines. What advice do you have for our listeners who may be attempting that transition themselves?
be okay with hearing no
Hmm.
and be okay with still knocking. Like, I'm being honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you get it because you've been down the road. I've been down the road,
Yeah.
but I think it's easy coming from a faith-based world where everything is relational and everything is vision values
Hmm.
centric, and it's always shared vision values centric. And because there is so much personal relationship involved in that kind of fundraising,
Hmm.
to realize it's okay to hear no.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a lesson I learned when I was in ministry fundraising, and I had to differentiate between the person and my relationship with them on a personal level, and
Yeah.
the ask I have before them on a ministry level. And I had to choose to be the one not to make it awkward.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And so understanding that the same mentality, like if you're good enough to do the ministry fundraising well and you
Mhm.
still have good relationships with people and they still want to be around you after they've supported you and after you've had a support appointment with them, then it's the same ethos of I have to own the things I'm going to own to set the table well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that folks that have never been in that type of fundraising don't really appreciate.
Hmm.
A lot of that missionary style personal support fundraising model, you're working your personal network. You're working your friends, you're working your family, that sort of thing. And I think if the average fundraiser out there in higher ed or in the nonprofit world had to do all their fundraising from their friends and family, a lot of us would really struggle because just the psychological pressure that you're referencing of having to do that is so hard. And I would even say that there's a strength in someone that's really good at that. That can be really valuable if you can get them into other types of fundraising. That experience actually does really well for them because you have a person who's really resilient, really determined, and knows how to navigate tricky situations.
And so it's funny because I think with the one thing, yes, it's a very big strong point, but I think the one drawback is
Hmm.
because we have I don't know if this is going to really dive too deep into the ministry space, but I don't
Hmm.
mind going there if you don't
Yeah.
mind going there.
No,
So
go ahead. Go ahead.
for those who are thinking about it, I think we tend to tie the calling of God
Hmm.
to our security.
Okay.
And so when we leave that ministry space and we feel like we're supposed to go to other places and apply without that security that the calling provides,
I see.
it gets terrifying.
Mm,
And I think that's a space where the man or woman who you are still has to be the man or woman who you are before God,
yeah.
whether you're in the ministry space or in the workforce.
I gotcha. So I think what I hear you saying is that, for the person that's working in a faith-based context, they're approaching it with a feeling of deep personal calling.
Mhm.
And when they go into a secular space, they may lose some of the confidence that they had thinking that, well, maybe this isn't a spiritual calling or vocation like it was before. And so maybe I don't have the backing, of my deity. And so
Mhm.
it's all on me. What do I do? Is that kind of what you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the space where in your personal formation, the same man or woman you are before God in ministry is the same man or woman you are before God in the
Hmm.
workforce.
Yeah.
I mean, because for those of us who call ourselves Christ followers, like our ministry, our ministry spaces as soon as we wake up and hit the floor. I think,
Sure. Sure.
and I think if we own that mindset, it's easier to make that transition, and it actually becomes a place of strength that you can work
Hmm.
from in the secular workforce.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you bringing up that point. So these days, you're the chief development officer for Vineyard USA. You were at Kenyon for a while, like I mentioned before. Could you share with our listening audience a bit about your organization, what they do, and what you're doing right now, what your focus is as their chief development officer?
Sure. So Vineyard USA is the organization that leads the the movement of vineyard churches across the United States.
Hmm.
And so right now there's about 480 churches who call themselves vineyard churches.
Hmm.
If you include those churches and some of them are campus-based sites,
Yeah.
then you're looking at around 520 total sites of churches
Hmm.
um, that call themselves vineyard and under the family and the umbrella of the vineyard church. And so what we do as Vineyard USA, our goal is very simple. It's just to support the work of the local church as best as we can. And we do that in ways, whether it's supporting the pastors in their leadership by providing leadership development and training and refreshment, or helping them supply their needs for doing things on a broader national level when it comes to campaigns, whether it's through missions or church planning, things that can really impact the community
Mm-hmm.
on a local level. And that our goal is to support that. And so the beautiful thing about what we do is our churches, they each give 3% back to Vineyard USA.
Right.
And up to this point, that's all Vineyard USA has ever been able to function off of.
Hmm.
Because Vineyard USA has never once done fundraising in any other way. And so, sorry about that.
That's all right.
And so it's funny because, like, as I've been thinking through what I want to see Vineyard USA do, my heart and my goal is to see that 3% in the future go straight back into the regions.
Got it.
I would love to get Vineyard USA to the point where we're not worried about that 3% anymore coming in and just supporting what we do so we can support the local churches, but it becomes part of what the local churches actually give back into each other right away.
Right.
And that's where I am, and I'm really excited about the things that we're doing. So yeah, it's a fun space.
Now, I understand you've got some positions you're hiring for presently.
I do.
What type of candidates are you seeking?
Well, for this round of hiring, I'm looking for 2 major gift officers.
Mm-hmm.
People who are understanding of what it takes to do the work of a major gift officer,
Mm-hmm.
to discover, cultivate the relationships, and do the asks, and do the great stewardship that comes with major gift fundraising. But it's going to be a unique space, because along with that, I'm asking those major gift officers to be willing coaches for our pastors
Yeah.
on a local level, because so many of our pastors are great at shepherding their people,
Yeah.
but have never really thought about, helping people use their gift of making money to help the kingdom grow.
Right.
So it will be I hope the major gift officers that we hire are willing coaches for the pastors that we have in our movement.
Now, are these remote jobs? Are these?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
These are remote, and so
Okay.
anybody can apply. Right now, we've closed the application process at this point,
Okay.
because we've got a good pool of candidates,
Yeah.
and so the goal is definitely to hire 1 major gift officer now.
Yeah.
If we can find 2 right off the bat, great.
Yeah. So there may be some opportunity out there for the right person,
Yep. And
potentially.
so yeah.
And what's a major gift at your organization?
Right now, we're calling it $25,000 or
Okay.
more. But honestly, like I want us to get to the point where we're pretty much industry standard at 100,000 or more.
Yeah. Right. Ha.
But we're an organization who's never done it before,
Yeah.
and so I think we just need to learn how to get the basics in under our belt.
Well, I'll tell you. But before I started this consultancy, I had the opportunity to do some interviews and talk with some different organizations in a number of different segments of the nonprofit sector. Folks that in the senior living space, certainly folks in the faith-based arena. And one of the things that surprised me is how much that thing that you and I think of as the industry standard in higher ed of 100,000 varies from location to location.
Sure, and I get that. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But I want us to be excellent at what we do, and so, Lord willing, that's what we'll be in 3 or 4 years, where the norm will be, hey, this is what a major gift is.
Yeah. That's all the time we have today. But be sure to tune in next week to hear the next part of this exciting conversation. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. As always, I'm your host, Tom Dauber. Thank you for joining me as we journey together toward major gift mastery on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast.